The great Michael Schumacher came into the 2004 British Grand Prix having won every single race he'd finished so far that season, but there was a problem in qualifying. A dramatic slide at Brooklands Corner sent the Ferrari driver spinning backwards down the track. However, watch this again in slow motion and watch what his hands are doing in the wheel. Yes, that's right, he did this deliberately. But why, I hear you ask? Well, it was all to do with the way qualifying used to work back in those days. In 2004, F1 had one-shot qualifying, meaning the cars would be sent out in a certain order to do a single lap in clean air to decide who was to start on pole position. The order that the cars were sent out was determined by a pre-qualifying session, with the fastest cars going last and therefore getting the best track conditions. The difference here is that rain was forecast for the end of the qualifying session, so Michael spun on purpose in pre-qualifying in order to ensure he could go out early in qualifying and avoid the rain. Why he didn't just slow down a bit, I'm not so sure, but whatever the case, it didn't end up mattering, as the rain didn't come until after the session. Michael could only manage fourth on the grid, proving yet again that if you play silly games, you win silly prizes. Pole position for the race was taken by Kimi Räikkönen by just 0.07 of a second over Ferrari number 2 Rubens Barrichello. This was an excellent step forward for the struggling McLaren team, who were only 5th in the Constructors' Championship at this stage and had less than 14% of Ferrari's points total. Third on the grid was Jenson Button in his home Grand Prix, ahead of Spinny Schumi in 4th. Following them were Jarno Trulli and David Coulthard, but not Fernando Alonso, as he had a grid penalty for an engine change and would line up 16th. In fact, there were a whole host of grid penalties, affecting Parnis, Bruni, Baumgartner and Fisichella, but the latter three qualified at the back of the grid anyway, so it didn't really matter to them. When the race got underway, Räikkönen had a sensational start, building up about 10 car lengths by the time he got to turn 1. There was a brief grassy moment from Montoya and the Williams, but everyone got through the first corner cleanly. Often in 2004, the cars on Michelin tyres were able to get better starts than the Bridgestone-wearing Ferraris, so Button searched desperately for a way to get past Barrichello before it was too late. He couldn't quite find it though, and at the end of the first lap the order of the first 6 cars were unchanged, and miles out in front was the McLaren of Kimi Räikkönen, who already had a lead of about 3.5 seconds. With that being said, you don't want to over-push it. Whoa, Kimi all over the shop heading into Luffield on lap 2. You can tell he knew he needed to build up a gap before the Ferraris got into a rhythm and started to catch up. This is like watching a gazelle bolting away from a crouched cheetah. Now watch at the back of the shot as here comes Takuma Sato all over the grass at Chapel Curve. I'm sure the groundskeepers would have thanked him for that. That's one less lawn mowing job to be done. Unfortunately for Takuma though, it did cost him 7th place to Montoya, whom he passed on the first lap. The first pit stops in this race came before you could catch your breath, with Barrichello pitting on lap 9, Coulthard on lap 10, and then Räikkönen and Button on lap 11. This did 2 things. Firstly, it put Michael Schumacher out in the lead of the race in clean air, always a daunting prospect, and secondly, it put Räikkönen out behind Takuma Sato's BAR. The problem with this is that they were on the same lap, and Takuma was in no mood to dart out of the way, what with being Jenson's teammate and all. Räikkönen started losing handfuls of time, and Schumi began to set lap record pace out in the lead. This is an important move then, Räikkönen up the inside into Copse, and that's cool as you like from the Iceman. Also pretty cool was the progress of Mark Webber's Jaguar, as here we see him also passing Sato a lap later. That temporarily put Mark up into 3rd place, but only because he was yet to make his pit stop. Still, it proved that he'd been running well on a heavier fuel load than some of the cars around him, and that's very promising indeed for the Jaguar driver. Sato then lost 2 more places as Felipe Massa came through along with Takuma's teammate Button, but the reason I'm showing you this shot is because of who Button is ahead of. As you can see, he had jumped the Ferrari of Barrichello in the pit window, and talking of Ferrari and pits, that's Schumacher finally making his pit stop. Let's skip ahead to when he exits the pits and relive that sinking feeling fans felt in 2004 week after week after week, seeing Michael Schumacher somehow take the lead of a Grand Prix. Remember, Michael had been running 4th before this pit window, but we're talking about the winner of 9 of the previous 10 Grand Prix. There was a certain inevitability about Schumacher in this era, and the fact that he would win. He was like the ominous shadow of a rain cloud drifting over the land, which is ironic considering what had happened in qualifying. In case you need your memory jogged, here's Giorgio Pantano doing his best Schumacher impression. Here's an interesting retirement from Olivier Panis. Believe it or not, his fire extinguisher went off and filled his cockpit with foam. At least he wasn't in a closed cockpit car though. Here's what that looks like if you were wondering. Don't laugh. Back to the race for the podium, the second pit cycle was underway and Barrichello jumped back in front of Button. It looked set to be a 3-stop race for almost everyone, with the exception of Fisichella, who had started on a heavy fuel load from the back of the grid. We haven't seen much of the Sauber driver, but he was impressively up to 8th place, even ahead of his teammate. One team we haven't seen much of today are Minardi, but they were about to have an absolute catastrophe. This is, Jean-Marie Bruni leaving the pits too early and pulling his mechanics along with him, as meanwhile the other Minardi of Jolt Baumgartner broke down out on track. Luckily everyone in the Minardi pit was okay, but both cars were well and truly out of contention. It's worth noting that the Minardi team was already having a tough week, as their sporting director John Walton had died of a heart attack just 2 days earlier, aged only 47. The team withdrew their cars from Saturday practice out of respect, and then ran a livery with no sponsors and a decal commemorating their fallen friend. Rest in peace, John Boy Walton. On lap 40 there was a huge crash for Jarno Trulli, whose suspension failed just after bridge corner and sent him cannoning into the barriers. The car spun like a spinning top, then dug into the gravel and flipped over before coming to rest on its, well, not its wheels, but the right way up at least. Luckily the safety cell of the car did exactly what it was designed to do and the roll hoop held up, and so Jarno was able to walk away from this accident, a truly remarkable escape. Let's not forget that this happened just 2 races after Ralf Schumacher's serious accident in Indianapolis, so there would have been a few tense moments at the time as the fans waited to see if there were any injuries. This crash predictably brought out the safety car, prompting several pit stops, including basically the whole of the top 10 except Schumacher. Everyone was now fueled up to the end and bunched up nose to tail, and the field prepared for a 15-lap showdown. When the race resumed, there were unfortunately 2 lapped cars between Schumacher and Raikkonen, which rather stymied Kimi's chances of racing for the lead. Luckily for him, Barrichello didn't get a good restart and actually looked to be under more pressure from Button. The order as they stood was Schumacher, Raikkonen, Barrichello, Button, Montoya, and then Fisichella up to 6th place. Raikkonen cleared the lapped car of D'Amato on the hangar straight, gesticulating to him as he went, and then set off like a bloodhound after Schumacher. Whoops, that's Giorgio Pantano, and no, that's not a replay. He made exactly the same mistake again. I wonder if he thought be on edge meant he had to literally kiss the grass in the braking zones. Anyway, he was beached in the gravel, but luckily they got him cleared up and there was Panta no safety car. Hello! Towards the end of the race, Raikkonen found himself under a lot of pressure from Barrichello, who was clearly faster. Not only was the Ferrari a better car, but it seemed the Bridgestone tyres were better in this point of the race too. However, it was proving extremely hard for the cars to follow each other in this race, so Kimi knew all he needed to do was keep it on the road to claim second. In the end, it was Michael Schumacher who came through to take a well-deserved victory, his 5th in a row. Raikkonen brilliantly held on to second ahead of Barrichello, and Button came home 4th for BAR. 5th place was Montoya, narrowly beating the charging Sauber of Fisichella, and the last 2 points-paying positions were taken by Coulthard and Webber. 12 cars finished on the lead lap, with the other ones being Felipe Massa, Fernando Alonso, Takuma Sato, and Marc Genet. I haven't really mentioned Marc, who was substituting for the injured Ralf Schumacher, but it's worth noting that this was his last Grand Prix in Formula 1, as he was replaced by Antonio Pizzonia for the next round. Marc went on to compete in sports car racing, winning the Le Mans 24 Hours in 2009 for Peugeot, alongside fellow former F1 drivers David Brabham and Alex Wurz. He was also Ferrari's test driver up until the end of 2010, and he remains a Ferrari brand ambassador to this day. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Daily Motion channel where I upload all the videos that get taken down from YouTube by the pesky FOM bots. While I accept that FOM owns the rights to the race footage I use, I believe that all of my videos fall under fair use due to the high levels of parody, commentary and review, and I always encourage people to watch Formula 1 live in order to better appreciate this great sport. Sadly, this isn't always enough. I also occasionally stream on Twitch, where you can chat to me live, so I've included the links to both my Daily Motion and my Twitch channel in the description of this video. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix a 4.7 out of 10, as overall I think it fell a little flat. The cars looked and sounded fantastic, and I loved this era of Formula 1, but I have to admit that they did struggle to follow each other in dirty air, and it got a little bit processional at times. This score does, however, include 2 bonus points, one for the perceived tension of a late safety car, and the other for the interesting storylines involved, such as Schumacher's qualifying antics and Raikkonen's upturn in form. I gave the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Giancarlo Fisichella for his phenomenal drive to 6th from the back of the grid. Remember, Alonso started ahead of him in the Renault and could only manage 10th. I'll give the Inouye Trophy for Worst Driver to Giorgio Pantano for spinning twice in exactly the same way. Drive safely guys, and I'll see you next time.